My paper was on From Downtown to Shopping Malls, the Changing Retail Landscape. Now, before I begin defending it, I need to say that it was 14 pages. And I know it's 3 or 4 pages short of the required amount, but one of the reasons is because when I was writing the final paper, I had gone back and rewritten this paper several times. And when I was writing the final one, it was 20 pages, but I was not happy with the way the last 6 pages or so were worded. And so I felt I was becoming more repetitive. So I needed to cut it down to make it fit the narrative that I wanted to do. Now, my question that I asked was, were the changing economic times and the inability to change with them some of the reasons why some of the greatest names in New England retail history no longer exist? And we know that Charles Darwin theorized that only the strong will survive. And in this case of retail, downtown versus shopping malls, it meant the strongest stores with the strongest desire will survive the changing landscape. And when I first began the paper, I went back to 100 years before that retail had changed a great deal. And when the stores opened, they were small mercantile stores that sold a variety of everything. They had clothes, food, stoves, candy, food, books. But people then began to migrate to the cities to find work. So you had stores that like Macy's, A.T. Stewart's, Lord and Taylor. Those were the high fashion stores of the Gilded Age. But in New England, especially in Hartford, Bristol, and New Britain, those stores existed too. In New England, we had stores like D&L, G. Fox, Sage Allen, Rayfield's, and Birnbaum's, and many others. Now, if Macy's catered to the fashions in New York, picture G. Fox being the Connecticut version of Macy's. That's how high-end they were. And that was the premier department store to shop at, mainly in downtown Hartford. I began saying that downtown stores were easy and accessible for women to shop with because many families still lived in the cities where the stores were located, so they could take the bus down, they could take the bus, they could walk, they could take the trolley, although Connecticut didn't have a trolley because the state is too small. And it was much more personal to shop downtown. There were no paper or plastic bags when you left the mall. They were boxed up and wrapped with a ribbon. I talked a little bit about how G. Fox got started. And if you lived in New England, especially in Connecticut, all you have to do is mention the name and people are going to know, especially at Christmas. Christmas time, the shopping malls, downtown G. Fox was the place to go. And when the store opened, one of the memories is that when the store opened, nobody expected it to be what it was. And the significance of the question would be explained throughout the paper. How did it disappear the way it did? And the primary sources I used, I relied heavily on a lot of sources from the Connecticut Historical Society as well as the New England Historical Society. Because the New England Historical Society has an exhibit about malls. It's Department Store Museum. And all you have to do is click on the state that you're looking for, and it lists all the stores that were once prominent in that state. And G. Fox was one of them. So those two sites I relied heavily on, and I wish I had been able to go visit, but due to the restrictions of COVID, I had to rely on online and what I could find. I went to because G. Fox was run by a very prominent Jewish family in Hartford, I went to the Jewish community website so I could get the interview from Beatrice Fox Auerbach, who was his daughter. I also relied on the Hartford Courant for the memory papers, the New Britain Herald, who had articles about DNL, the Bristol Press about downtown Bristol shopping. And then I also went to I did look in Redbook and Good Housekeeping, but there was an excellent secondary source by Vicki Howard called From Main Street to Mall: The Rise and Fall of the American Department Store. And there she talks about how it went from downtown to the shopping mall, which is exactly what I wanted to talk about. And if I could use that one source, only one source for this paper, I probably would have used that one because it had so much information in it. Even though it was a secondary source, it was the best source of information that I was looking for. I also used a book from Patricia Huddleston and Stella Minahan about what made malls so popular. And one of them was because, and I had to add in there that women were the ones that controlled much of the consumer spending, and that's why the shopping centers and the shopping malls took off the way they did. I put a little bit in there about how in the 19th century it was a necessity, but I didn't talk a lot about it. I talked more about how when families began to migrate to the cities during the Industrial Revolution, shopping became more of a leisure activity, and how that's why they went downtown. I put in there in my paper when when I put in there about the shopping mall, I had mentioned that in the downtown stores, there was no such thing as a credit card in the 1940s and 50s. But in 1956, when the shopping mall came in, and then in 1974 in Connecticut, the West Farms Mall was open to the public, and I had to tell how it was named and how many stores were there. The biggest difference that changed was that credit cards were now available. And people could, instead of spending money, they could give the store this credit card and they could buy it and then pay for it later. So more people shopped. And I ended it with saying that I didn't focus a lot at the end about online because the focus of the paper was downtown to shopping malls. But I did mention that Vicki Howard now calls it, at the end of her book, e-tailing, and how sites such as Amazon and Etsy are crushing the competition, and the retail stores are going the way that the downtown stores did. And the question again has to be asked, what makes these huge department stores go from downtown to the shopping malls to out of business?